This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. The podcast features conversations with musicians and music industry professionals, all intended to help musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Hello, damas and caballeros. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. The second episode I ever recorded was with guitarist, recording engineer, Texas native Chris Raspante. I was nervous that day. It was episode 2 after all, and appropriately so. I got 20 minutes into my interview with Chris and realized I had not hit the record button. Chris was a good sport about it, and we started over, made a little light of the whole situation, and got the interview done. Chris played guitar on a noteworthy track called Bad Things, which is the theme track for the HBO series True Blood. As such, he's friends with the writer of that song, one Jace Everett. Some months later, I got an introduction to Jace, and we have today's episode, an interview with Jace. Interestingly, this episode is a little bit like episode 2 in that I'm doing some experimenting, so it's a little like starting over. I'm experimenting with the production process, and I'll be your editor for this episode, hoping it sounds as good as the previous ones. Jace is an interesting guy. He's passionate, very talented, and he's kind of funny, too. I love his latest album, and you get to hear a track from it at the end of this episode. You should definitely check out the full album. It's available pretty much anywhere you can get digital music. The album is called Dust and Dirt, and the track I chose is Lowlands. Yes, Jace suggested that I choose the track to play at the end of the episode, which was a challenge because there are a lot of good tracks on the album. Check out all of Jace's work at jaceeverett.com, JACEVERETT.com. It'll be in the show notes for you. And here is my conversation with Jace Everett. Jace, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man.
Of course, and extra thanks for accommodating my schedule since you originally tried to do this yesterday. So I appreciate you working with me.
I have an inordinate amount of spare time on my hands this week, so that's really all that's about.
Well, I got lucky. Tell me a little bit about how you know our mutual friend Chris Raspante, or the beginnings of when you guys met. And by the way, I'm from Fort Worth, so I bet we were hanging out in that area around the same time, based on what I know about where you moved from. I didn't know that.
That's cool.
Yeah, but I didn't meet Chris until somewhat recently. But yeah, tell me about your relationship with him.
We like how you meet all your true loves. We met in a bar.
That's how I met my wife.
Chris and I, yeah, exactly. He's my man wife from way back. No, Chris and I met in '98. I was a relatively new parent, and I had been out of the music game for a couple of years working construction and was desperate to begin playing again. And I was hanging out at a little bar called Bronco's, which still exists, although at a different location. But it was right near my house. And I was up there hanging out with... turns out we had some mutual friends from back in the 80s because we're aged at this point. But I met him there, and we did a couple of... I brought him out to sit in on keys and guitar and a couple of things. And before you know it, we were just playing together and writing 90s style rock songs together. And we did that from 98, 99 into 2000, which is when he eventually moved up to Nashville. And he quit the band. He and I had a big blowout, a big fight, and it was brutal. It was very much the days of our lives. Like what we were doing was important, but we had a big cat fight. He took his toys and moved his ass to Nashville. And about a year later, I missed him so much that I just moved up and started hanging out with him again. So
that's great.
He's a good man, a good friend, and a phenomenal talent.
He is all of those things. I think I've only known him. I'm going on 2 years this December because I met him around the Christmas holiday season at Bronco's, the new location. And I used to play at Bronco's, the old location where you guys met.
There you go.
Small world. And, it's funny. So you started podcasting, which I want to talk about later. But back, I was noticing in July of 2016, I published my episode in July of 2017, and he was episode number 2, but I think I did him and episode 1 like within a day of each other. And I was trying to remember because I remember he talks about, the first thing I asked him about was, how did you end up working in Nashville? And I was like, was he talking about Jace that he went? But so I guess he went up there to hang out with some other guy, and then you came and joined them later.
It was John Christopher Davis, who's actually back in Dallas Fort Worth and crushing it, doing a lot of corporate and public stuff. But he's John Christopher Davis is who he came up here to play guitar with and help make demos. And then John knew of me because he saw us play together, and he was a fan of my voice. And knew that I was a bass player because that's what I was doing in the band with Chris. So Chris talked him into, hey, we should just get Jace up here. And then our buddy Ryan Hoyle, who went on to have fame and fortune with Collective Soul and Paul Rogers and other folks playing drums, he came up at the same time as I did. So that was kind of the band. John had a pretty smoking band, to be honest. I mean, it was a talented group of folks, and I was definitely on the lower tier of the talent pool because Ryan and Chris are both phenomenal musicians.
Well, you don't seem like such a slouch. And speaking,
I do okay.
Speaking of bass, I completely forgot, but I don't know how many weeks it's been, but about the time that I reached out to you the first time to invite you onto the podcast, and you were a little busy, I take it, but Chris had said, yeah, he's been playing bass for Tonic for a while, and he's from DFW. Totally fits the profile. So, were you doing that very recently on tour with them up until sometime this year?
Yeah, I actually just came off the road a few days ago. We did a tour this summer with Gin Blossoms and Vertical Horizon, and it was fun, man. It was. I toured with them last summer. I'm not, just to clarify, I'm not the bass player in Tonic. I am a touring bass player in Tonic, as the name Tonic is owned by Emerson Hart and Dan Lavery and Jeff Russo. And Dan Lavery is the bass player in Tonic. In fact, he just did a fly date with him this weekend, totally screwing me out of fly date money, which is way better than bus money. But, you know, I always have to throw in the caveat that I'm not Tonic's bass player. I just play bass for Tonic. It's a nuanced business, apparently.
So
with lots of glass-like egos.
Does that mean that he's the guy that's on the records, and sometimes he does some live gigs, but most of the time he
Correct.
doesn't?
He is the guy that played everything but the first record. The first record, the really, really big record from 96, Lemon Parade. That was God, what was that guy's name? Dan Rothschild, who went on to play bass with Beck, and I think he's the band leader for Heart now. And he's a monster bass player, but Lavery's a monster bass player too. I'm a very good bass player. Both those guys are monster bass players. And so I'm learning those tunes took me far longer than it would a normal sideman, because, you know, I'm a creator. I'm a songwriter. I don't typically learn other people's parts, as Raspante can attest to, since we were in a cover band together. He was always irritated with me. Said, dude, that's not the right part. I was like, it's fine. It's a G, C, D. Don't worry about it.
He strikes me as
I've always been a lazy bastard about learning other people's parts.
Yeah, and he strikes me as one of those people that wants all the details to be just so when it comes to
everything's got to be in it. He's very OCD about
it. I share that with him a little bit.
Which led to one of our many fights.
That's too funny. So let's see, how long then have you been touring with those guys, with Tonic? Is it off and on?
It's just in the past 2 years. Okay. I've been doing gigs with Tonic, and then I've done a couple of shows with a corporate band called Ezra Ray Hart, which is Kevin from Better Than Ezra, Emerson Hart from Tonic, and Mark McGrath from Sugar Ray. They do a thing where the three of them play their hits and then play some, fun stuff for the crowd. And we do it's me and a drummer and those three guys. And that's a lot of fun. Hanging around Mark McGrath. I kind of want to put on a shiny shirt since, it's all these 90s guys. I want to go down to Chess King and find a shiny shirt to wear. But it is legitimately fun hanging with them, because they're just, McGrath in particular is just a very sweet. He knows exactly who he is. He's like, I'm not a great singer. I'm an entertainer. And he gets up there and people just eat it up. It's fascinating.
He's from
Sugar Ray.
Sugar Ray. Is he the singer?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I don't remember their names. Yeah, he does strike me as the entertainer.
He did that Access Hollywood for years. I mean, he's just got a set of stones on him that is amazing. He's afraid of nothing. He just gets out there and does it. It's great.
So I remember years ago when Howard Stern was still on the radio. I guess he would have Sugar Ray in from time to time, and I didn't know they had this sort of heavier side to them prior to their being like, you know, whatever 90s hit makers. But I remember, I guess Robin, his female sidekick, at the time had said that when Mark walked into the studio, all the women in the studio just sort of stopped what they were doing to watch him walk by. I'm like, I guess he's kind of a good-looking guy, yeah.
It's not. He is a handsome guy, but it's not about that. It's about charisma. He just has this, and he's inviting with his charisma. Some people have kind of a dark charisma that's a little bit intimidating, but he's the kind of guy who the guys love him and the girls want to get with him. You know, he's just one of those charmers.
He must smile a lot.
God bless him. He does. He's a smiley fella.
So you weren't born in Fort Worth, right? You were born in Indiana. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was born in Evansville, Indiana, and I didn't move we moved around to a couple different places, but I got to Texas, got to Tarrant County when I was, I had just turned 6 or 7. I can't remember.
So
I guess it was 7. It was 79.
What was childhood like wherever the memories kind of begin? I know that's kind of like I have pretty fuzzy memories from before 7, but
yeah, I had a lot of happy memories. My dad was on the road a lot, so there was that. I didn't really start spending a bunch of time with him until we moved to Texas. But I have to be honest, when I first moved to Texas, man, I hated it. Because I was a ginger. You know, my skin's almost blue. I'm so white. I had this bright red hair, and it was like, holy shit, we moved to the sun. Why did we do this? You know, there was this amazing heat wave this summer when we moved there. I was like, well, why are you trying to kill me? And I just, I don't know. I think I was a hypersensitive kid. It could be argued I'm a hypersensitive adult, but I definitely was as a kid. And some of the Texas bravado and everything, I didn't understand it when I first got there. I took it at face value, and so it kind of freaked me out initially the first few years I was there. But I don't know. I had a great family life. I didn't have any big issues with mom and pop. You know, they're both still around, thankfully, and always had a good rapport with them. I've always been a little bit of an outsider and a little bit of a loner, and not much good in a large group unless I'm on stage or with a bullhorn. And so Texas was initially pretty tough for me, but I acclimated after a while.
Yeah, and my wife and I always like to joke that, well, I mean, in Texas, everybody's so nice. I mean, they legitimately are nice, but also we have this sort of joke that everybody is very outwardly kind of wants to be in your business for a lack of better phrasing, but I would imagine as a young introverted kid, and I don't really remember it a lot as a kid. It's just more as getting older that we lived my wife and I in San Jose, California for a long time, and there's just a big, when we moved there in 99, it's a big melting pot already, and the culture was very different, and it makes you reflect on how outwardly nice everyone is and polite, you know, in Texas, but at the same time, there's a funny aspect to it. Like we always say, like they want to know immediately what church you go to and how many kids you have, and like whipping out pictures of their kids right away. It's kind of cute, but
and a lot of that's just a Southern thing. You get that in Nashville too. You know, the thing with Texas that is both charming and off-putting, depending on where it's coming from, is the pride. Mm-hmm. You know. It's like, this is Texas, and you can kiss my ass. It's like, okay, well, you know, it's just a made-up imaginary line that people put on a map, right? It's not like, and you know, if you're born here, it's not actually an achievement. It's just where your mom was when you decided to come out. So, you know, stuff like that gets me a little irritated at times. But it's also often fairly harmless and kind of charming. So I love Texas, and still got family and tons of friends there, and I'm definitely glad I grew up there.
Yeah, it's a nice place. I've always called it home. And then now, I don't know if you know, but I'm living in Panama in Central America now. My wife and I moved here in, when did we get here? 2016? Yeah, August 2016.
So, clue me into that. I looked you up, and I was like, he lives in Panama. What's happening?
Yeah, well,
are you like a drug mule? What's going on? Are you worried about the canal? We lost the canal, man. You just got to let it go.
Right, we're on the lam. We spent 17 years in San Jose in the Silicon Valley area there, and I grew up in Texas, and we've always kind of had the wanderlust, the two of us.
You got it, you nailed it. Nothing but net.
Yeah, and we just started thinking about being strategic with the years we had left toward work toward retirement, and we were living in one of the most expensive communities on the suburban areas on the planet. So it was just a change we planned out for a while, and we finally did it. It's been pretty nice. We're living, we did all this planning, but we ended up moving not to necessarily the best place we could have moved to, but we are now living in a beach community, which we really love since February, and it's all been good though. The whole time has been good, even before.
Dude, you're living my wife's and my fantasy life. I love my country, and I can't wait to look back on it fondly from somewhere else as soon as possible.
Yeah,
I can't wait to remember what I loved about it, which is slowly being eaten away. Well, I digress. Forgive me.
No, yeah, the beauty of living in another country is it takes a while. And I do speak Spanish. I wouldn't call myself fluent to the extent that I can talk about politics, but it takes a while to really appreciate the politics of the country. And you live in, for me anyway, I feel like it's a little bit blissful. Now we can't escape our own, all the things that bother us about the place that we're really from, just because I'm, across a few borders. But meet people. There's a lot of Italians here, and Chinese, and Venezuelans and Colombians, and I always remember this young Italian friend of mine that was just railing on the government there, and I was thinking, yeah, it's the same everywhere. Everybody's feeling malcontent toward their government, or a lot of people are anyway, not everyone. So yeah. Okay, I digressed. Why did I get on that?
People that can read are feeling malcontent.
Now.
But I get it. That's a joke I make. I speak French pretty well. My Spanish is abysmal, but I lived in Europe for a bit and spent a lot of time there. And I always joke to my wife that the dream is to live in a country where you, A, don't know the language, B, have no intent of learning, because everyone there seems so brilliant. Because you don't know what they're talking about. They're like, boy, these guys, they're so smart. They can speak this language, and they know what's going on. And I just want to stay in that sense of just idiotic bliss. It seems like a lot of people enjoy that, and I'd like to give it a shot. So,
well, it has its moments.
Dream, buddy. Sure. That's all I'm saying.
It has its moments. And before I forget, and I still don't remember why I wanted to say, by the way, I'm here in Panama, but since we're living your wife's dream, or whatever you called it, you have the two of you have an open invitation to come visit sometime. I'm hoping to start a little house concert series, so maybe you can come down and even play around here for a little bit, but come enjoy the beach life for a week or two.
I'm in. I've never been to South or Central America, I'm embarrassed to say. So that sounds extremely appealing.
Well, we'll talk some more after
yeah, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes today.
Yeah, I honestly, we'd been to Mexico, my wife and I, and to Europe, but until we started exploring this whole idea of being an expat, or whatever we want to call it, I hadn't been beyond Mexico, really. So we looked at Nicaragua, and thank goodness we didn't choose that. They're having a little trouble again.
Yeah, that could have gone poorly.
I always say, it can go sideways anywhere. So, but yeah, so
that's
you guys would enjoy it, I'm sure. I want to also ask you about Dust and Dirt, your most recent album. Did that come out actually last year?
It was 2017, yeah. It was to little or no fanfare, not because of the quality of the work, but just because of the way the business is now. I made the record. I'm sitting up here in my attic right now talking to you, and this is where I made the record. My friend Dan Cohen and I, my co-producer, and my publisher and guitar slinger, Dan Cohen, and I made the record up here in my attic and then overdubbed drums off campus after we'd kind of made the record, which I know is probably making you seasick as a drummer, but it was the first time I'd done it. And it was actually a really fascinating thing. I programmed drums. We made the record, and then I took my drummer aside and said, look, here's my stupid ideas. I'm going to send you the program tracks with the tracks. Then I'm going to just send you the tracks with a click track. And I want you to do what you do, and only reference my program drums if you're confused. And it wound up being great, man. I had to come back and change a few bass parts just because he came up with drum parts that were way better than what I came up with. No duh. And therefore I needed to adjust the bass parts accordingly. But it was really an interesting way to make a record. I don't know that I'll do it again anytime soon, just because it was a tremendous amount of work. But it was really interesting in a way to approach the songs in a different way. But yeah, that came out in 2017 and self-released. We made a handful of videos for it, and it's out there. It's floating around. People are buying it. People are streaming it, and I'm grateful.
Well, I think it sounds great. I listened to it today for the first time, and I haven't even listened to the whole thing, but I think it sounds great. Now I have to listen to it with a different set of ears since you did the whole remote drum.
Now that I've ruined it for you.
No, not at all. I mean,
now you'd be like, I could totally tell that's overdubbed drums. That's bullshit.
No, I promise you, I won't be able to tell. You know, what you have over me is you've actually done a lot of studio work, and I have done very little. So it sounded great to me. So it's interesting to hear you talk about the challenge of that. So, yeah. Well, I hope that does that mean you are not currently with a label? And the reason I ask, which is funny, this is usually something I talk about before we start recording, and I forgot. But that is, I love to feature.
Man,
say again.
I haven't not signed a recording contract since the one I signed in 2004 that I was relieved from in 2006. That's the last time I had a recording contract. Now I do licensing deals with distribution companies. And then with Dan Cohen, my musical partner and publishing partner, he and his company, Weston Boys, he and his brother have a company called Weston Boys Entertainment, and Weston Boys Publishing is what I'm signed to. And then when I go to do a record, we approach each record like, hey, do you guys want to participate? And they'll either put in money or whatever and co-own the masters with me for a set period of time and co-own the publishing with me. It's an unbelievably equitable deal for me. I don't really know why they continue to do it, but I'm exceptionally grateful. And it's been really good for me because it's permitted me the opportunity to make the records I want to make. Dan participates. He's definitely my principal co-writer. When I co-write, he's usually the first guy I'm going to go to, and he and I make the records together. So it's been a really good deal for me. I don't know how long we'll be able to keep that party going, just because I know that I spend more of their money than I make most years. So we'll see how it goes. We've had years where I've made them a lot of money, and then we've had other years.
Feeling like more others.
I don't like to talk about those other years, but they do seem to grow in number as time passes. It's really disheartening.
What year about did you? I guess I'll maybe ask it from the point of view as a songwriter, and I was going to use the word publisher, but that's not right. But you as a professional songwriter, when did that part of your career start?
I guess I've always been making songs up, since I was little. But as far as making my living as a songwriter, that really didn't happen until 2003 when I signed with EMI to a publishing deal here in Nashville. And, I think they were paying me $32 grand a year or something was my draw. And of course, they owned all my publishing, and they would give me a modest budget to go do demo sessions. And then I'd have to turn in 12 songs a year, which, to be clear, if Dan and I wrote a song, that would be 0.5 songs that I turned in. It would have to be 12 whole publishing. So if you co-wrote everything, that would mean 24 songs. If you wrote everything by yourself, it'd be 12 songs. That was my deal with them. When I lost my record deal with Sony, which I got my record deal with Sony because I had a publishing deal with EMI, basically. I was relatively attractive at a distance, and I could sing in tune most of the time. So they gave me a record deal because that's just what they did in the early 2000s. If you were white and had a heartbeat, they would give you a record deal in Nashville. And I met those qualifications. And when the record deal came to an end because I didn't sell any records, didn't get any chart love on my Sony record, the publishing deal ended about a year later, which was ironic because I did have a number one song as a writer in that publishing deal, but they let me go. I wasn't a real commercial country writer in their estimation, and I think their estimation was fair. So I've still been making a living at it, but it's such a different landscape 14 years later, how you make a living and what kind of living you're talking about. So I'm sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, and I'm not even sure it was remotely clear to your question. Forgive me.
No, it was interesting. I was thinking, are you able to see what, newcomers to the business, like in Nashville, how they are approaching music as a business compared to what we just talked about at the beginning?
Yeah, I think it varies. I think that's kind of the interesting thing. There used to be a bit of a homogenous ideal that you come to town, you have X amount of songs that will be your Schedule A. You do some writers around you, shuck and jive, you meet some folks, you get some co-writes, they sign you to a publishing deal. Now you're trying to write for people that are going to make records. That still exists, just as described. But because the money is so different, because there's so much more talent trying to do that, so competition is much more fierce, but also the rewards are much more scarce because streaming simply doesn't pay what airplay pays, and airplay is less and less significant. So people are having to find other ways to augment their income. For example, my deal back then, which I was getting, like I said, I think around $32,000 a year. To get $32,000 a year as a draw as a young writer now is unheard of.
Yeah.
It's way less than that. And of course the cost of living is way higher. So if you've got a songwriting buddy and one day he picks you up in the Uber you called, 10 years ago, people might've, stuck their nose up at that. Now people are like, oh dude, that's cool. You're out here at night making money and then you're working on your craft in the day. I respect you. And in some ways I think that's kind of healthy. The last 80 years, the music business came into existence. And for a big chunk of it, a whole lot of people were way overpaid. If you look at the history of music and music writers and performers, historically, we've done it out of passion and love. And even world-famous composers died in abject poverty. It's just in the last 60 to 80 years that people have private jets and live in a mansion because they wrote 4 stupid songs that everybody knows, So in a way, I kind of feel like it's adjusting, it's correcting itself for a bubble that was odd.
Yeah,
I'm probably going to get shot by songwriters for saying that.
Yeah, I've never heard it put that way, but
yeah, not many people say, "Oh, I'm overpaid," but I mean, really, we kind of have been. Really, there's the money that actors make and film directors. And some musicians, it's a bit obscene.
Sure.
If you're a mechanic or a plumber and you're literally swimming in other people's fecal material for your job and you're making $100,000 a year, you probably resent somebody getting a BMI check for $150,000 in September.
Yeah.
Because they wrote a song about a truck. It's a little weird.
It can be in those terms. I gather from the little bit of the podcast that I've made the time to listen to, and I do like the podcast, by the way, and I only recently discovered it. It was the only reason I haven't heard more of it, but I gather that family is a big part of who you are these days. Tell me a little bit about your family.
Family's always been a big part. Marriage has not always been something I've been extremely successful at, but I have tried it quite a bit. This is my third marriage. I became my brand new girlfriend and I, when I was 23, became great with child. I'd known her for a month or so, and we decided to try the right thing, and we got married, and we're married for about 5 years or so. It didn't pan out, but my son has always been kind of the center of my world, and that hasn't changed. But I'm now remarried just a few years ago to Nicole, and she had a 7-year-old daughter when I met her, and I'm now get to be her stepdad all the time, and once again, it's just such a joy. I've got a 22-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter and a wife that loves me, and everything else is kind of just shit I do between now and being dead. Those three people are what matter to me, period.
And I kind of gathered
it's really true.
No, I kind of gathered just listening to the episode of your podcast that you almost said what you just said, but in a different way, that they were very important to you. Your son, he's a musician, yes?
Sadly, yes, he is, and he's good, which is even more irritating because that means he's going to cry. Thankfully, he does listen to me as often as not, which is astonishing. He's been a great musician for a long time, and I just told him, I said, look, man, I'll support you in any endeavor, but I insist that you get a proper education that is not in music. And he just graduated university with a degree in physics, and which is great. That means he has a real opportunity to work for a living and not necessarily do just manual labor type stuff like I'd have to do. But he's going to take a couple years off and pursue music. I did an EP on him a couple of years ago. Me and Brad Jones produced a record on him. I'm about to do a new one on him this fall. And he's a great songwriter, super talented player and singer, and he's really good. He really is. Not commercial at all. So I'm really glad he has a degree in physics.
And is he happy about the degree in physics?
He is. He has a real passion for science and math, and he wants to be an artist for sure. But he swears up and down he really would be okay teaching science to 11th and 12th graders, or even at a college level. He would actually find some joy and pleasure in that. So, when you got a kid, man, you just want them to be as happy as they can be. And when I deal with depression, and my son deals with depression, and knowing that he at least has two possible vocations to pursue that might afford him some joy, that gives me a lot of comfort as his dad.
Well, I don't have kids, but I can imagine, and hey, I was a kid and had a dad, but yeah, I can imagine, and I observe in my friends that, they're, for obvious reasons, they're your world, and can mean...
Well, they're also a huge pain in the ass. I mean, don't get me wrong. They are your world, but it's also like, we wanted to sell all of our shit and move to Panama, but we can't because we've got these kids. So
this part
there's
I know.
Nothing wrong with not having kids.
This part I understand. That's kind of our joke because we don't have children. It's we call our friends' kids boat anchors and things, having fun.
But that's absolutely true. It's completely true. I happen to love my boat anchors, but make no bones about it. They do. If you're going to be a good parent, you are going to have to give up some of your own desires, or just be a bad parent and pursue everything you wish. But I prefer to be a good parent. For me, there's more joy in that. It's an act of selfishness. It just makes me happier.
Good for you. And your wife is a musician or a singer?
My wife is a nurse, but she and I are working on a musical project right now. She actually lived in L.A. for a long time and had a lot of experience in the screenwriting and production world. But she's a really thoughtful writer and a super sharp person. Her dad was a singer-songwriter. Her ex-husband is the front man for Tonic. That's how I met him.
Okay.
I've been working for my wife's ex-husband the past few summers just because we get along, and his daughter lives with me, so why not? Yeah, she and I are working on this weird synth pop project that she and I are writing, and we're both doing some singing, and it's all programmed, and it's super strange, and we're just having a lot of fun with it.
Well, that sounds very cool, given what your predominant background is. It's got to be fun doing something totally different.
Yeah, well, the thing that I'm known for isn't necessarily what always gives me the most kicks. So,
yeah, I wondered. So, when almost always when I hear someone in country, I'm like, I wonder where they started. And when we were talking about Chris, you mentioned that you're writing rock tunes with him, and now obviously you're exploring all kinds of things. You have this great quote on your website, which I wanted to read part of, and I guess just hear your thoughts on it. But you said, "I'm a lucky dude, that's for sure. Every time I start to complain about my life, I just remember that I was literally a ditch digger at one point." What do you? I don't know how long ago you wrote that, but what's your kind of self-talk with perspective these days, and why life is great?
Well, first of all, being a white man born in the late 20th century in the United States gives me a phenomenal edge on most of human history as far as being okay. And I've always known that. My father and mother drilled that into me from the time I was, prepubescent. It's like, dude, you are so freaking lucky just to be here now and be male and be Caucasian. It just gives you, because most of the world doesn't have those advantages, and it's tough. I mean, I look at the difference between my life and my wife's life. She's had to put up with things that were just never even on my radar.
As a woman,
just based on our gender,
Yeah.
And so that alone is a starting place. But the fact that I have made a living, and in many years I've made a really good living making up songs and playing them, that's insane. I mean, you shouldn't be able to feed your family with that, but I've been able to do it, and it's a privilege. And I can piss and moan about the state of the business or the state of politics or this or that or the other, but the truth is, I've had a very, very fortunate existence, and so I kind of look at my job as not just to continue enjoying that, but to try and facilitate other people having some of those opportunities. Because, no matter how smart you are or how talented you are, to get a number one song or to get a TV theme song or to get to play late night TV, that's a confluence of circumstances that you aren't actually controlling. You're just fortunate. You're lucky. It's luck. And so I'm grateful for the luck and hope I get some more of it, and want to try and help other people get lucky as well, because it's a matter of access to opportunities.
Yeah, indeed. I almost forgot to, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the Nashville Later podcast. What inspired you to start it? Since I haven't listened to a lot of it yet, what's the premise of it today, and has that changed at all? And are you planning to do more episodes this year?
We are going to start back. I'm not entirely sure when. I haven't done an episode since February. We did, I believe, 85 episodes in about 13 months. I was doing 2 episodes a week every week.
That's a lot.
With a few repeats. On Mondays we would have a guest, and on Thursdays Nicole and I would just get on the microphones and kind of rap about stuff. The premise was let's talk to Nashvillians, but not make it about country music famous people. Let's talk about Nashville as a fairly cosmopolitan city at this point, and has a lot going on that has nothing to do with country music. And country music's great, not bad mouthing. I love the format of a podcast. I love long form questions and long form answers. Reading is, to me, the best journalism is still written. But we're all so addicted to our devices and so on the go that most of us don't take time to read long form journalism anymore. And I include myself in that. I get lazy about it too. So the way I absorb long form journalism these days is through podcasts that I love. And I just like the format so much that I was like, you know what? I want to do that. I'm not great at being a spectator, whether it's sports or pornography for that matter. I want to play. I want to get involved. I don't want to watch other people do this. I want to do it myself. So, I mean, that's really, and my wife and I are always looking for things to do together that aren't, sitting around watching television. That's why we're working on this record together. That's why on the podcast, I'm the guy on the mic most of the time, but she's helping book the guests. She helps me edit the show. She's very responsible for some of the tone and timbre of what we do on the podcast. And we like doing stuff together, man.
My wife's in trouble. I'm going to tell her that yours is editing, lining up guests.
Well, she's not editing in the sense of going into Pro Tools and literally editing, but she's making sure that I don't show my ass any more than she's comfortable with. So that means I only show my ass quite a bit as opposed to constantly.
That's
if it
okay.
were up to me, I'd be making faux pas every third sentence. So
that's okay. I'll still tell my wife she's doing all that stuff anyway. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about my wife and I. We hang out together all the time. We were working from home, and we're not in the city, so we're not super far away, but we're in a beach community, so we're constantly together. And it was interesting that you said you and your wife are always looking for, sounds like new things, or maybe you even said new things or different things to do together besides watch TV. I think that we, over the years, we're actually coming up on 25 years, but next
great,
year,
man.
Crazy. But off the top of my head, I think, when I think about the things that we do together that aren't the everyday routine, which we enjoy, it's travel. And then over the years, I laugh, it'll be things that my wife wants to do and she'll drag me into as well, and we'll do them together, and they're always fun. But anyway, very cool that you have those things together. And
yeah. Well, if we had more money and didn't have a 10-year-old, we would probably just travel.
Yeah.
But it's a heck of a lot cheaper to come upstairs and turn on my Pro Tools rig.
Yeah.
It requires no passport. We don't have to get shots. It's great.
So you and your wife, then, you expand outside of the realm of music guests, then, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've had judge magistrates. We've had a few school teachers, physicians. I had a staunch gun advocate on who's actually an astonishing marksman, world-class marksman. I'm talking about the gun issue in our country. Mm-hmm. We have had musicians on, of course, writers. We've had people on that don't have any specific qualification. I just think they're interesting and want to talk to them.
Sure.
And so that's really what it's about. It's the theme, I guess, if anything, is, what's Jace interested in this week? And that's kind of what it boils down to. I guess it's a fairly self-serving, a narcissistic journey, really, when I think about it. I'm explaining it.
Well, I mean, although I've been working on this niche of helping out the indie artist, it's all, I think, as with most podcasters, there's just always great stuff for me to learn and to selfishly ask about that. I imagine most of the time is a benefit to people that are listening to it.
Well, absolutely. None of us are that unique, and we like to think we are, but we all kind of have similar needs and desires in life. And no matter what line of work you're in, you can really learn something from somebody who doesn't do what you do, because it can be transferable and applicable to your craft. So it's a great thing.
What are your favorite podcasts that you like to listen to these days?
I still go back to some of the old standards. I still like Mark Maron, depending on the guest. Mm-hmm. I actually like him more now than I used to. I think he's kind of gotten his head right about some things. He's more pleasant. I really love The Gist. Mike Pesca's The Gist. It's a Slate podcast. It's kind of a news digest daily, like a 20 to 30-minute show that's also very funny and very bright, a lot of wordplay, and I like words. I listen to the 538 podcast. I like the Malcolm Gladwell podcast most of the time. And then when I'm just feeling really stupid and want to embrace any politically incorrect thoughts I might have, I put on Bill Burr's podcast where he just yells into his phone for an hour. So, I don't really listen to many musical podcasts, I find. I have a weird relationship with music these days that I'm not sure what it all means, but I've just recently really forced myself to start listening to records. And so I'll pick an album each day and listen to that album. And it's hard for me to do. It's hard for me to keep a focus on it. I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with my brain, but it is a legitimate struggle I'm dealing with. It's frustrating.
Well, it sounds like you feel some sort of obligation about it, and then when you let go of that, it'll be okay, and you can just listen to whatever the hell you want, and it won't bother you.
Yeah, I do feel an obligation as a creator to be so. I'm 46, so I'm intrinsically going to be out of touch a bit, and I accept that. But I'm more out of touch than I need to be, and I think that's a problem as a creator. So I'm trying to.
I heard. There are a couple of music podcasts I forced myself to listen to, so I'm kind of like you. But one of them's a drummer's podcast, so. But the other one is kind of in the serving the same folks in a way that I am from a completely different approach. But so I forced myself to listen to those. But anyway, on one of those today, one of the hosts is a creator of a very successful and great online music education platform for drummers. And he wasn't just talking about himself, but he mentioned that he was the same way. And I can't remember the artist that they were talking about, but they said that that particular person purposefully didn't look at what everyone else was doing. And I don't know if there was some sort of concern about being influenced or copying accidentally, but the drummer educator mentioned. Yeah, he said that. He's like, I don't want to accidentally copy someone. I haven't watched an online drum lesson, and he couldn't remember how long, yet he's created this wonderful platform.
Yeah, that is a concern of mine as well. And when I'm getting into writing mode, I do tend to isolate myself. But the fact of the matter is, the way our mammalian brains work, we're emulating regardless. None of us actually have original thoughts. We can synthesize existing thoughts in original ways, if we're fortunate. But none of us are, look, we've got 12 notes to pick from, assuming we're using a Western scale. And 9 times out of 10, we're dealing in a 4 meter. Every once in a while you'll have a 3 meter, but not on the radio. None of us are reinventing the wheel, and to pretend that we are is silly. But I'll get calls from film and TV people. Hey, what we really want is this song, but we can't afford it. Can you give us a version of that song? And my answer is always, fuck you. No, I can't, because that isn't right. But I've got songs that have some of that flavor that I'll play you. But now that you've told me that's what you want, this conversation's over, because I'm going to be forced to try and emulate that. And I'm going to consciously be, robbing somebody. And I can't consciously do that. Had you not said anything, I probably would have given you what you want. But don't tell me, we really like this Johnny Cash song, but we don't have $150,000. You're kind of Johnny Cash-like, and you do. It's like, dude, yeah, why don't you listen to my songs that are kind of Johnny Cash-like and give me one of those to rip off, because it's mine. So it is tricky. It is tricky to try and stay original, but also acknowledge the fact that in the end, you're not original at all.
I had a smart-ass thought jump in my mind, was that you should put together a very short ebook for people who do that, and tell them you've got a great ebook they can read on stroking someone's ego properly to get them to work for you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, Jace, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for joining me today for a conversation. What's on the horizon that people can look out for or listen for soon?
My fear is global thermonuclear war, but that aside, I'm beginning the writing of the next Jace Everett record, and once again, it's going to be very different than the last one, because I'm going to continue my theme of never giving my audience what it actually wants from me, so that I can piss my wife away in obscurity. What a Freudian slip. I just said piss my wife away. I better go check on her. She's probably mad at me about something
I thought that's what you said.
That is what I said. It's total Freudian slip.
That's funny. Well, I look forward to hearing the project. I'm looking forward to actually listening to the rest of the album that's been out for about a year now, or more than a year now, that I hadn't had the opportunity to hear before. I'll check out a bit more of your podcast at least, and maybe one of these days here, I'll even get to have a cup of coffee or whatever in person sometime.
Sounds good, man. Panama suits me just fine. I'll get the hat and everything.
All right. Well, I will definitely stay in touch with you about that, and thank you so much again for your time.
Thanks for having me, man. Cheers.
Feel the beat of the heartland, honey. The river's running slow. Down here at the water's edge where it's a slippery slope down in the lowlands. You reach out for a helping hand and all you get is a rope. Around here it's a buyer's market. Wanna sell your soul down in the lowlands. Been at the bottom such a long time, baby. It almost feels like home. Sinking fast like our hearts are made of stone. Might be broke, but we're still breathing. And some way, somehow we're leaving. There's only one way left to go. It's out of the lowlands. Rusted cars with busted taillights, going nowhere and fast. Empty shells and broken bottles, I guess even dreamers crash down in the lowlands. Been at the bottom such a long time, baby. It almost feels like home. Sinking fast like our hearts are made of stone. Might be broke, but we're still breathing. And some way, somehow we're leaving. There's only one way left to go.
Hey, thanks again for listening. This episode was powered by the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs, how to get booked and paid what you're worth over and over again. Available in paperback and for Kindle on Amazon. The ebook is now available on Apple Books, Kobo.com, and just about anywhere else that you might find ebooks. It's also available as a standalone podcast called the Unstarving Musician's Guide podcast. You can learn more about the book and companion podcast at unstarvingmusician.com/book. I'd love it if you picked up a copy, and I'd love it even more if you left a review on Amazon. With much gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell.